So you've been asking your partner over and over again to fulfill your wants and needs. You went to them the first time and said, hey, this is what I want, this is what I need. They said, okay. They didn't do it. Then you go to them again and say, hey, these are my wants, these are my needs. And they say, okay. They didn't do it. Then you go to them again, but maybe this time you're a little bit louder. Maybe this time it leads into an argument because you're trying to express your wants and your needs. You don't feel heard. So you're like, maybe I need to try a different approach so they can hear me. That didn't work. So then it gets to the point where you're like, you know what? I'm not being heard. Maybe I should clock out of this relationship and just be done with it. And you start pulling back a little bit. And just before it gets to the point where you're like, you know what? I think I might just call it quits. They all of a sudden start doing everything that you want them to do magically. And now you're like, you know what? Maybe I should stay and see how this turns out. Maybe I just need to give them a little bit of time to make sure they heard me. And they're doing what you want them to do. And then they stop. And they start getting complacent again. And then they just automatically forget what exactly you wanted and needed them to do for you. And now you're back in this position contemplating if you should stay or if you should go. But then you remember, well, maybe I just need to give them a little bit more time so they can continue to do what they were doing before. So I'm just going to wait a little bit longer to see how this turns out. And you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and nothing's changing. And then you go back and say, hey, remember my wants and needs? And then they come back to you and say, hey, you're asking for too much, or you're doing too much. Oh, I'm not doing all that. And now you're questioning if you really are doing too much or if you are asking for too much. And then you stay to yourself now because you don't want to feel like too much in a relationship and you feel like everything's your fault up until this point. And now your wants and needs aren't being met, and yet you're still doing things for the other person without them having to ask. And what's crazy is you don't even know if the things that you're doing for your partner are the right things because they're not coming to you and telling you what they want and they need. You're just taking a shot in the dark, and because they haven't said nothing, you're assuming that everything you're doing for them is right. But now you're at the point where you're realizing that you're giving more than you're getting. So you're contemplating leaving again. And just before you leave, guess what they decide to do? If you said the things that you wanted and needed, ding, 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 you are correct. They all of a sudden start doing the things that you want and need. The reason this happens is because they know in order to get what they want and what they need, they have to do the absolute bare minimum of what you want and what you need. And you accept it because it's just enough to get by. Meanwhile, it doesn't require a lot of effort on their end in order to get the things that they want and that they need out of the relationship. And they get it without having to ask for it. Meanwhile, you're running dry because the other person is important to you. And how long is that relationship going to last before you actually are capable of walking away? In all honesty, leaving is the hardest part. You have to realize that the person that you are with is not capable of fulfilling your wants and your needs, and you are not going to be with this person long term because at this rate, they're not capable of loving you the way you need to be loved. You got to accept that.